All right, a happy Friday to you all. This is Sam here with you. We're kind of mid-morning on April 20th, 420. And I've got a couple of scenarios here to talk about with regards to Bitcoin. So now we're going to dig into my work here on the right here, the hard right edge of the market, but I just wanted to give it some perspective here and just for a quick review. So from our all-time high here, we're in this corrective phase, and now it's a question of, do we have a new trend starting here? And, we got to reconcile a few things. One is, of course, that this algo target here from our swing high to low to the 50, we still have this algo target down here unresolved, around 33.63. So that, needs to be in our consciousness in terms of, scenarios that might be in play here. So looking at that, what else can we see and determine objectively? Well, from a swing low to swing high here, as I pointed out, in previous videos, we are still internal here. So we have not violated this low. We still have an internal retracement, and now we're starting to move off of that low, setting up the possibility for this to be a new trend that's underway. So to look at that, this is the count that I currently have as my primary count. I have us coming down here in a WXY. This is the question mark, or the area that's, open to interpretation as, many know the joke or the scenario, or however you want to phrase it, that, put this chart in front of 5 Elliotticians and you'll get 5 different counts. That may be the case. There are a number of different ways that you could count this. As I look at it now, and we are going to look at a couple of different possibilities here. So this as my primary count, I maintain my bullish bias, as I'm certainly on record noting that with this internal retracement, we have the possibility for this to be a one wave coming out of the hole, completing this correction. So we have the motive wave structure. We, in fact, have an impulsive wave that appears to be underway. So, I suppose bulls will see it as a one wave. Bears might see it as an A wave. It could be either. And until we go up and challenge some of these old significant fib levels, there's no way to really be positive about what we have. But we can certainly still trade it and take advantage of the price action that we see here. So let's dig in a little bit more. Now, I'm going to go down. I'm at the 3 hour. I'm going to go down to a 1 hour. I should note here that I'm on Bitfinex. So digging in here now from my proposed low down here, as either it's finishing a C wave of this ABC, and we finish with a truncated fifth, which is, I still red flag on that, right? So one line of thinking is that because we truncate the fifth, it's too much demand, the market is strong, so that's what creates that truncation. It's true, right? That's no doubt about it. You can certainly read it that way. I just keep a bit of a flag on that. It's unusual, say it that way. But we could certainly, for bulls, what do we see? We see market strength, and then we see this motive wave coming off of this proposed low here, right? So, and we've got, with our 4 here, we've got a very nice, clean 5-wave structure underway that creates the possibility for this to be just putting in a one wave of a new trend, right? So that's how I am reading it right now, although I am aware of alternate counts, and we're going to look at least one of those this morning. So with that here and this proposed low here, we can dig in here now. So you can see here I've just working with my dominant pivots here. I've laid out some median lines here. Here's our pitchfork. We've got the 2.5, 1.5, 100, and we can see how nicely this has framed the market's geometry of how we're moving. And it would be certainly hard to argue with this as a 1, 2, 3, 4, and potentially now going up into our 5th. So if we just, let's dig in a little bit more closely here, and we can do a little bit of analysis to help us fine-tune some of this. So if this is 1, 2, we're looking for the 5-wave subdivision to give us our proposed third high here. And it's all there. So we get this nice 1, 2, 3, 4, down we go. Kind of a, this is a little bit, questionable up here because Different exchanges have this as a new high here. Others have it as a failure to make the new high. As we're looking at it on Bitfinex, we're going to use this here. So I have this here as our fifth of our third, and then we come down here in 5 waves to give us an A, 3-wave B, and then a shallow C, but there's 5 in there nonetheless, and then it's technical. So as we would be, I'd try to identify any 4th wave. We'd want to go from the low of our 2 up to the proposed high of our 3rd, if I can get it right on there. And, you know, technically, it couldn't be any better. So it's a slight front run on the 38. All right, not unreasonable. Note how we go right. It's absolutely astonishing how often the markets will do this. We go right into the lips of the Vegas wave, right between the two. That's our pivot here. So we get the support here, and then we've moved away from that impulsively. So here's our 1-2. We've got this kind of slow grind higher. It's not the prettiest impulsive wave that I've ever seen, but then we get this kick this morning that comes up here to give us a potential for a 3rd. Now there's a couple of different possibilities here. So one is that we put the 3rd in here, and that down here was our 4. You see no violation of the 1. So it's not an unreasonable scenario to say that we may have this playing at we may have this playing here now as the 5 being in. Well, so what would help us determine that? Well, we can see the upper parallel, perhaps with some geometry resistance there, but also we would just use our fib tools. Now from here, for this algo pull from 2 to 3, with the front run at the 38, we've got this target up here. We've got the algo target up here. Right, but we also have just our Elliott wave relationships that we can consider. So we know that very often there's a relationship between the length of 1 and the length of the 5th. So if I take my alternate tool and I do just that, I look at the length of my 1 wave, and I project it from the proposed low of my 4th. Well, if I drag that over, you'll see it a little bit better. If I bring that over, we've got a very common relationship here, which is 100%, the length of the 1 wave. So you have this equality. 1 wave equals 5th wave. Now you can see we've wicked through it a little bit, and we're still holding up here. But this is a contender here as a possible 5th of the 5th being in, right? We'll know fairly quickly if this kicks up yet again, then likely we'll relabel. We'll go back up here to this upper algo target here. Here we've got the 1618. So you see we get a bit of confluence up here, which is always something to be aware of and to be noting. I've got my 1618 and my negative 23.6 overlapping here, or very close to overlapping here, which sets up the possibility for this to kick one more time to give us that as our 5th. This, of course, would then be relabeled. We'd call this, you know, assuming that low is in, and we're going to move from this. We don't know. 4 could come down a little bit lower, but right now you could label it that way. You could, and within this could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of 3. Right, we won't know that until we see whether or not we start to roll over here, or whether we get this final kick. I'm inclined to think that we've got one more little kick up here, but we shall see. Now a quick check of the oscillators. You know, we got a little hot here. We've rolled off of that. There may be one more little push up, but certainly we can Certainly we can see this pretty substantial divergence that we had here to give us our 3rd. And then here looks like if this is our 1 here, we don't have any signs of divergence. We're too far apart. I wouldn't be using this 3rd here necessarily as divergence here. It's really, you know, there's not much divergence there if I really get right on it. And there's too much separation between the two. So you know, I'm inclined to think we do have this one more kick up here. I'd like to see that as we go down. Maybe if we went down to a 15, we could see a little bit better into whether or not there's any divergence there. But nonetheless, right now, if you're not long, I wouldn't be a buyer here looking for a kick up here because of this possibility that we could be putting in the 5th here, and this is just a little A wave going in. Remains to be seen what's happening there. So, you know, too late to be a buyer. I certainly would not be selling it here. So if we play this out, though, if we start to put together a roadmap and think, okay, if that's 3, 4, and whether 4 comes down here, either way, there's a scenario here that plays a visit back to the median line wouldn't surprise me at all, and then perhaps one more kick up here. We'll see. Here's our 1-2. That will be, important to us as to whether or not we stay with a motive wave to finish, or pardon me, an impulsive wave to finish this. Well, if it finishes, so let's just assume it does, just for the sake of the analysis as we look here. Well, if that finishes, that is not necessarily bullish for us in the short term because we're completing a 5-wave structure. So if we allow for this, as I have this marked, so let's just play that out. Well, if we finish up here, I can take this off now. All that's doing is setting us up for, let me scrunch this in so you can see it better. So we complete the 5-wave structure, potentially a 1-wave. So that's all we're doing here is just proposing that we may well have a, let me get these up here and we'll get them in white. We'll go up a degree. We can go to intermediate. Okay, so if this is going to play as our 1, right, up here we get this little kick up to give us that completed, very pretty 5-wave impulsive structure, potentially a 1-wave. Well, all it does is set up for the 2. So looking at that, if we go back to our absolute low here, our proposed truncated 5th C of Y low, and we get it. So if we were to go up here, now granted, I'm hypothetical here. So if we go up, and if we're going to top out here, well, then our next buy zone is down here. We're now anticipating that we're going to get a corrective ABC coming out of that to set us up for the, let's see, let's come down here, set us up for the second wave. So if I keep this hot, let's get the wave on that just so we can see it. So potentially here's what's setting up for us. Whether this is the 4, this is the 4, remains to be seen what's here. But either way, whether we're rolling over here and we're kicking down, or whether we've got one more kick up for the 5th, either way, we're just trying to identify the next opportunity to be a buyer. Well, at least that's what I'm looking for. Next opportunity to be a buyer. There may be some people looking to sell this. But we look at this as a potential wave 2 that would suggest that anywhere from the 50 to the 618 is our next buy zone. So we lay this out here. So the 50 is, we'll call it 7,700 to 7,400. That's our next buy range here, at least as it relates to Bitcoin on Bitfinex. So again, it's just a bit of a hurry up and wait. Now, what the positive developments are is that we've with this price action here now, we know we have a 5-wave structure. Whether or not the 5th ends up being here or here, we have a 5-wave structure, which implies the trend is now higher. So just not to leave the bears out, if this is an A wave, well, we're still expecting a move back to anywhere from the 50 to the 786. So the setup is there for this to be retracing this impulsive wave. So whether it's an A wave or a B wave, it implies that a correction is likely coming if and when we complete this 5th up here. So you got to keep that in mind. So it's a double-edged sword here. So the 5-wave structure is confirming the new trend, but all it does is set us up, recognizing that when we pivot up here and we complete this 5-wave structure, then we're looking for a 50% retracement. That's the next buy zone. So not a lot to do here, really, other than try and be patient and wait for this to set up for the next opportunity to be a buyer down here between the 50 and the 618. And then, you start looking for additional things we might use for reference. So immediately I see this pivot here that's coming up, damn near right, splitting the difference between those two. Prior resistance potentially there for some support if we're going to come down here. We also note here that we have, if you look here over on the volume profile, we have a big low volume area here. So the market did not accept this pricing, and you can see why. You can see here how we moved so quickly through it. And then it wasn't until we got up here that you can see it reflected in the market profile here. Here's our point of control, the most trading volume happening right here at 8,100. So the market accepts this price, likes it. We got lots of buying and selling right here, thus creating the point of control and the highest amount of trading at that price. So given that now, if we were going to come back to this area where we did not have market acceptance, and typically it will do one of two things. It will either just roll right through it as it did here, right? It'll just push right down back to an area of acceptance, which we see down here, or it will pop and pivot, and then we'll be off to a establish potentially what bulls are looking for is our third. So we'd be looking for the first of the third on the larger degree. So these would, of course, all be much higher. So we take the third up. We know our target is going to be up here. By our negative 100, this all goes way up. So that would take us to, oh, here's the negative 100. That's 11.2. And maybe there's another kick here to complete what sets up as a 3, 4, 5, right, to establish this new trend. So that is certainly there. That is a very reasonable route with which we could get there. So again, sorry, I wish I could tell you buy it here. I certainly wouldn't be a buyer here as we approach a potential 5-wave top here. Now, this is one of the things that Elliott can be really useful with Elliott's methodology here in determining the potential pivots and the trend, this move off of our low down here at 6,500, starting to run out of gas. So potentially we're in a topping area up here to set up this correction. All right, and certainly we want to pay attention to how the market is responding to this geometry as it's contained this move so beautifully as we moved off that low. All right, so that's one scenario here. Now, so some people can say one of the problems with Elliott Wave is that there are too many scenarios. Others will tell you one of the interesting things about Elliott Wave, what I would propose to you, is that you have multiple scenarios, and so that makes you think. So you have to check yourself and challenge yourself and say, okay, well, what if I'm wrong here? What if this is not what I'm seeing here? I can't argue with the 5-wave structure. That we're beyond that point now. So I've got a 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got a new high here. So even if we topped right here and this ends up being the 5th, we've got a 5-wave structure. I've got an impulse wave coming off of this low. That we can be absolutely certain about. Right? No question about it. We know markets trend in 5s, they correct in 3s. We've had a very complex correction over here, but this is absolute. We know without question that we have a 5-wave impulsive move off of this low. Right? So that's bullish for us long term. Now let's just go take a look at an alternate count. Now, for those of you that are not members watching this on YouTube, one of the best things about being a member within our Trade Devils University is that you're not just getting analysis from me. I have 4 additional, we call them senseis. I have 4 additional, we'll call them, how about I use the word trading coaches that are in here they're all Elliott certified. They're all very skilled technicians and traders. And you'll get input and counsel and coaching from them as well as me. And one of them had an alternate account that I thought was really worth noting because there's a couple of things that I can show you and teach you as relates to the count that he's proposed. So I'm going to go over here to this alternate. Now this is certainly from an Elliott perspective. There's no violation of any Elliott rule set here. So that again, it's a question of whether you find this interesting or annoying that there can be multiple counts here. Well, if you the idea here is to step back, big picture, and think, okay, what else could be going on here? Well, one of the things that you've seen a lot of technicians do that, just again, rudimentary technical analysis, we can use a trend line. So if we work off of those first 2 pivots and we just extend down, you can see we get this intersection here. So from pivot, 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 then as we start to break, we get a breakthrough, we come back and recheck it, and now we've moved away from it. So that's certainly something to be aware of. Now, the other alternative is that you might go wider with that, and then we go off of this one. So now we've got pivot to pivot. We go through here, test it. Now as is often the case with trend lines, they are rechecked. So it gets through, comes back, checks it, note Vegas wave, and now we've moved away from it. So that also is an alternate, and we put that in the context of the lower support here that we can see. So you get potentially this triangle formation. But here's what he noticed and where it gets interesting. So one of the things that it's always worth checking, particularly when you've had a move like this where it's just parabolic, it's worth looking at the log scale. Well, if I take this off and we go to log scale, I'm going to take all of this off here. Now take a look at what happens. So there I go to log scale. So we get the compression. We get the compression of the upper prices here. Well, look what happens to our trend line now. So if I go from absolute high to my next pivot, now I've got 3, and I just extend this. Take a look at that. Interesting, right? Now we come over here and we go off of this pivot, we go off of this pivot, and we have the potential, let's back this up a little bit. We have the potential for a triangle to be being identified with a slightly different methodology. I'm trying to get those right on those pivots. So this sets us up here as a possible, right? So as we're looking at the alternate count, as we're looking at this count back here, with a potential for this fifth to be in here. So if we have this, right, we know we have this possibility here that the fifth is in here, this fifth is in, pardon me, this fifth here would be in, and potentially the one wave is in. So that's a contender we have to consider. Well, now if we go back here and think about where that is and where we sit right here bumping into this trend line, it's going to be a very interesting scenario to see what happens here. Do we get through? Because right now I've got four taps of that trend line working in log scale. So it sets up the possibility here that all we're doing is putting in a very large triangle, which would make absolutely perfect sense. So what does that set up? Well, it would set up a three-wave counter trend move. Since we've had this move here, it sets up a three-wave for an E, but that in turn would then give us a pivot low to go up off to reestablish the trend and move off of this. Right, so a very interesting scenario. Now, to add some additional technical confluence to this, we can dig into this a little bit more. So let me pull this off here and consider what else is there. Why are we stalling here? Is it the trend line? Well, let's dig in here a little bit more. I'm going to go from this B over here. So let me reset that. Okay, well, we know in my count here, the way my primary count, I should say it that way. I had this as I'll show you again here. I have this. Where I can even get it back here. Well, I guess I don't have it labeled here. I have this as an ABC WXY. Right, so this is the X. This is the three wave. So this is not an insignificant pivot here. So down here, here's our sharp break, the three wave counter trend that corrects it, and then we go down yet again in 5. So this pivot here is significant. Well, note where we are right now. So if I take that swing low, or pardon me, that swing high, what have we done? Well, look at where this D is coming in. Look at where that trend line is coming in. We've literally just tagged the 618. Off of this swing high to this swing low, we're coming in and we've tapped both the trend line as well as the 618. Now, can we get through it? Sure we can, right? There's nothing says we must turn there. But if we start to back off here and we start to roll back down, well, where's our likely target? Right? There's our E wave, which sets up a completion for this. So this would likely you'd be looking for this to complete in a three-wave structure before we set up for potentially what could be the move to end this correction and move off of that. Of course, we'd want to see us move off of that with a motive wave, either an impulse or a diagonal. So an interesting scenario here. This would make for a very deep E wave here. If that's our pivot, we can come all the way down here. We'd see if we're going to bump into this lower trend line, we'd be approaching the 887. So a deep correction, but got to be considered, especially as we sit here topping. Now, it'll be interesting to see over the weekend if we can get through that. If we can get through it, right? It is the top in right here. If we start, so then we'd be looking for this. If that's our top, right? So we can see the market geometry is right there. It all supports it. If this is a potentially, so you see I have it here as a one wave because of that 5-wave structure. But if we come back over here, could it be something else? Well, it certainly could be considered. I've got my 5 waves in. So I've got 5 waves that I can't ignore. So I've got this 2, 3, 4. I've got that scenario. Let me get that down to a reasonable, we don't need to be an intermediate. So I've got that 5-wave structure. Well, this is where it's so problematic. So as you'll recall from the other count, this is just a cluster. Is it a truncated fifth? Is this the 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2? Is that what we have? Or is it perhaps a triangle? Well, if you might be able to consider that and say, okay, well, if I'm working from this low here, that would be, if this is corrective, I have the potential for this to be an ABC. So I can look here and go, well, this could be A, this could be, well, let's see, we'd be A, B. This would put us here as a B, and then likely we'd be up here. So we'd have A, B, truncated C in the B. So from the A, we'd have A, B, then down here for the C. Now, in a 4-hour, you're not going to see that subdivision, but you can see the triangle pattern here. Here's the big break through it, but that sets up as a contender now. That could be just setting us up for this 5-wave structure that completes a C wave. So how are we going to know? Well, of course, the first thing is, can we get through the 6-5? Can we get through it? So let's back up and say, okay, well, wait a minute. Would that invalidate? Well, it would certainly be significant as relates to this trend line that I've drawn all the way from our absolute high, where we have multiple taps. This would be our 4th. Now, I'm going to certainly go back one additional pivot. So looking here now, let me get that. Let me get this off. Okay, if we do get through it, so let's say that we do. Well, here's the 50. It would ruin the symmetry. So let me get the wave off of that. So now that you see it, so it would ruin the symmetry that's here of this trend line being the significant resistance coming all the way from our pivot high. Remember, as it relates to being in log scale. So I would be, you certainly don't want to ignore this 50 and this 618. I mean, that's the dominant pivot high to pivot low. So we want to be paying attention to those. But the first thing we have to do is get on the other side of this trend line. If this count is not going to be realized, and this is ultimately going to be just a 1-2 before we head up with, so the idea being, so here's a low volume node, so we come down, we get a 50%, then we move off of that, so we have a 1-2, and then up we go for the 3. So if that's going to play, well, then first thing we got to do, we got to get through this trend line. So we're going to have a fairly good idea in the very near term whether or not we can break through it. But the fact that we're sitting here now trying to get through that 618 from this prior 3-wave pivot, significant. So this is absolutely an area to watch. If we get on the other side of that, would call it 87.50. That would be a bullish development. But think about it this way. So again, I'm going to go back down here, and let's go to an hourly. What does that set up for us? Either way, no matter what the scenario, it's a bullish bias. All right, so if this is coming down here for an E wave, we're correcting this. So let me see if I can show it all to you. So we still have this. So if this is playing as an ABC, the anticipation is that this is our D. This would be a corrective wave before we launch, as I just showed you, before we go from this lower pivot and then start to head higher. So likely what we'd be looking for here is something along these lines here. We'd have something like this to give us an ABC coming down here, putting the wave on it. I probably should have left that, wrong one. Let's take that off. This is the one I want. There we go. Okay, so there goes the wave. So that's potentially now something to consider as an ABC coming down here to give us our E, but still for whether you're, regardless of whether you see this as a bit large triangle or as a 1-2, either way, the longer term implication is bullish. And this would be a very clean and kind of a cool correction, right? If you think about it, in terms of this giant diagonal, kind of interesting. So I've lost my scale here. So let me go back to my 4-hour. Well, 3 will do it. Right, so if we break out of this makes for a really interesting. So now you look at the entire thing and you go, I could absolutely see, given the extreme move that we had through 2017, that we'd correct that in a complex correction like this. Maybe a techno geek like me, I find that to be very cool. I think that would be really interesting to see it correct that way, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. So, I'm kind of torn between these two counts. So you just have to take it, one pivot at a time. So if we come back here, well, we can certainly evaluate this if we're going to pivot here because of that trend line resistance, the support, everything that I showed you, the 100%, the length of 1 equal to the length of 5. If this starts to come down, well, we're looking for 3 waves here, just like we're looking for 3 waves over here. It's the same thing. The difference would be the depth of it. So where's the tell? Well, what happens at the 50 and the 618? If we get through this, right? Well, now we're looking back over to our alternate count here, saying, oh, well, maybe we're going down as low. That E wave trend line support is 67.93. So big difference from that as opposed to last stand for our buy here would be at the 618. That's 74.45. About $1,000 difference, or $1,000 relative to Bitcoin coming, here, or are we going down to, in the 64 range? So interesting. It's going to be very interesting. Wouldn't surprise me at all. Either one of these could easily play out. I think what we can draw from it longer term, though, is that either scenario implies bullish continuation, that either the correction has completed down here or the correction is still underway. There's one more push down before we go up to head off to challenge those highs. Right, so very interesting development, right? So, and my thanks to our senseis for their the great work that they do within the room, and the ongoing idea exchange. You'll find that they are invaluable to the experience that you'll have as a member. So with that said, just a reminder here now that we have our second channel, our second YouTube channel. If you're interested in seeing these methodologies exactly the same way applied to traditional assets, we're going to start doing a weekly update on the S&P and the NASDAQ as well. Much like we're doing Bitcoin on Friday, I may start doing that on Saturday, let the market close, and we can evaluate and maybe get some direction for the coming week. So with that, I'll wrap. You can find that other channel at Trade Devils, plural. That's the only difference. One channel is Trade Devils, singular, where we're just focusing on crypto. The other is Trade Devils with an S, plural, where you'll see these same methodologies applied just as effectively to traditional asset classes. All right, you can always learn more about what we're doing, what we can offer at tradedevils.com. And with that, we'll call it a day. All right, guys.